Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are going to be deconstructing a universally accepted, incredibly simplified historical narrative that you have likely heard your entire life. We're going to take a really close look at a foundational story that shapes how literally billions of people understand history, genealogy, and belief. But as we unpack the source material today, you're going to see that the standard story we've all been handed, well, it's doing a lot of quiet editing. Let's start with a little test.
I want you to genuinely think about this for just a second. Quick, name Abraham's sons. If you're like almost anyone who has ever sat in history class, gone to a Sunday school, or read an article about world religions, a very specific answer is probably springing into your mind right now.
You probably said two, right? Most people say two. You name Isaac and you name Ishmael. And maybe you even know the traditional split of the story. Isaac is born through Sarah and Ishmael is born through Hagar. And somewhere down the line, that specific biological split becomes the exact reason people point to when they say that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are Abrahamic religions. It's this super clean, two-branch family tree that basically explains the origins of our modern world. But here's the thing. That answer, it's wrong. Actually, scratch that, it's missing a massive piece of the picture. Abraham had at least 8 sons. Yeah, you heard that right, at least 8. By the end of this explainer, you're going to know exactly who these other 6 sons were, why almost nobody ever talks about them today, and most importantly, why the 2-son version of this story, the one absolutely everybody knows, was never really about biology in the first place. Section 1. The family everyone knows, or the tidy narrative.
So let's run through the fast version first, because we really need to ground ourselves in that familiar narrative before we completely tear it down. According to the text, Abraham and his wife Sarah can't have children. So Sarah offers her servant Hagar to Abraham instead. Now, I know that custom sounds incredibly strange to us today, but it was actually a pretty recognized practice in the ancient Near East for securing an heir. So Hagar has a son, Ishmael. Years later, in what the text treats as this profound miracle, Sarah, who is well past childbearing age, has a son of her own, Isaac. So now we've got 2 sons, but only 1 inheritance. Sarah pushes for Hagar and Ishmael to be sent away. Abraham does it, Isaac stays, and carries the line that eventually leads to the nation of Israel. And this just brilliantly illustrates that tidy narrative, right? Jewish and Christian traditions trace their story through Isaac. Islamic tradition places central importance on Ishmael. 2 sons, 2 distinct paths, 1 very tidy story. Except, as the already established, it's not 2 sons.
Section 2. The brothers nobody mentions, also known as the Forgotten 6. Because look, after Sarah dies, the book of Genesis tells us that Abraham actually marries again. He marries a woman named Keturah. And she doesn't just have 1 son, she has 6. So we have the remembered sons, Isaac and Ishmael. But we also have the forgotten sons, Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. 6 sons. And they are almost never mentioned. You literally won't find them in a standard world religions infographics or popular retellings. Why? Well, partly because none of them become the direct ancestor of a major world religion that's still practiced today. They simply don't fit into the neat, color-coded story people are used to telling. But if you listen closely to that list of forgotten names, one of them should absolutely stop you in your tracks: Midian. If the name Midian rings a bell, it's because centuries later in the book of Exodus, Moses actually flees to the land of Midian. And while he's there, he marries the daughter of a Midianite priest named Jethro. Now, Jethro isn't just some random background character. He becomes one of the absolute most trusted advisors in Moses' entire life. It is Jethro who looks at Moses and says, hey, you're burning yourself out, trying to judge every single dispute in Israel personally. You need to delegate. Which, by the way, is advice Moses actually takes. So what does all this mean? It means the story people think is this super clean 2-branch split is actually a family tree that loops right back around on itself. The Midianites aren't just random outsiders to the biblical story. They are cousins several generations removed, showing up exactly when it matters to help the Israelites. The whole 2 sons version is doing some very heavy, quiet editing of history. Section 3. Gifts, then exile, the uncomfortable truth. We really need to talk about what actually happens to these sons who got left out of the family, because here is a detail that almost all summaries skip entirely. Genesis 25 tells us exactly what Abraham does before he dies regarding all of these extra sons. First, he gives absolutely everything he owns to Isaac. Then, he gives gifts to the sons of his concubines, including Hagar and Keturah, and he sends them away from Isaac. He literally sends them eastward, to the east country. But notice this one specific detail. He does this while he was still living. Just let that sit for a second. This is not a will executed after death, where family disputes suddenly become someone else's problem. Abraham is alive. He is actively, deliberately separating his other children from the one who inherits. He gives them just enough to leave, but he makes absolute sure that they leave.
What this ancient text is describing is a harsh reality that is still deeply, uncomfortably recognizable today, isn't it? Unequal inheritance and a parent managing family conflict by engineering distance instead of actually resolving the conflict. It's tough. It's choosing one child's prosperity over the inclusion of the rest of the family. And the thing is, this harsh tactic happened once already in a text, and much more sharply, with Hagar and Ishmael. When Sarah demands that Hagar and Ishmael be sent away, the text notes that Abraham is deeply distressed. I mean, of course he is. Ishmael is his son too. But God tells him to do it anyway, promising that Ishmael won't be abandoned and that he's going to become a great nation in his own right. This whole scenario sets up a really profound theological tension in the story.
Because what happens next is incredibly striking. It is one of the only moments in the entire book of Genesis where God speaks directly to a woman. Hagar is alone in the wilderness with her son. They are out of water. She completely believes they are both going to die, and God speaks directly to her, not through Abraham, to her. Genesis 21 says, God heard the voice of the boy, and God was with the boy. Whatever else this ancient text is doing, it is making a strange, almost contradictory claim. The son who gets sent away is not the son who gets forgotten. Ishmael is excluded from the inheritance, but explicitly promised he will not be abandoned by God. Exclusion and blessing are just sitting right next to each other, and the text doesn't even try to resolve that tension. It just holds it.
Section 4. The legitimacy twist, reframing the bloodline. So, where does this leave us today? Well, here is where the story gets incredibly fascinating, and it's the part almost no one gets to. We actually have to pivot away from biology altogether. The absolutely crucial point is this phrase: Abrahamic religions. You have heard Judaism, Christianity, and Islam called the Abrahamic religions your whole life, right? We use it as if it's this ancient, self-evident category, like it's the natural, inevitable result of this family tree splitting 3 ways. But it's not. That phrase, used as a unifying label for these 3 traditions, is largely a modern framing. It was developed and popularized through 20th century interfaith dialogue. It is not how these traditions historically describe their relationship to each other, and frankly, it's not even how they primarily describe their own connection to Abraham. Let's look at how the traditions actually make their claims. In Islamic tradition, Abraham isn't primarily important because of his biological sons. The Quran identifies him as a Hanif, someone who found monotheism before it was ever formalized into any single religion, a figure who submitted to God directly. The claim to Abraham is about faith. It's not about bloodline. Now, centuries earlier, the early Christian apostle Paul makes almost the exact same move, just in the opposite direction. He argues in his letters that Christians are children of Abraham not through descent, but through faith. Think about that for a second. 2 completely opposing traditions arguing across centuries without coordinating with each other at all, independently landed on the exact same reframe. Legitimacy comes from belief, not biology. The family tree was never really the point. Section 5. Who gets left behind? The real inheritance. Because think about it, if both the 2-son version everyone knows and the 8-son version almost nobody knows are missing the point, what is the actual historical purpose of these origin stories? The actual inheritance being fought over in these ancient stories was never about land, it wasn't about livestock, and it wasn't even about a biological birthright. It was about the right to say, we continue what he started. Genealogy in this context is really an argument about historical continuity and legitimacy. It's a way for a tradition to plant a flag in the ground and claim that they are the rightful spiritual heirs to a legacy. So the next time someone tells you Abraham had 2 sons, you can tell them all about Keturah and Midian and Jethro hiding in a family tree that nobody bothers to draw all the way out. But maybe the more interesting question isn't how many sons Abraham had. When a tradition, whether that's religious, national, or honestly even just your own family, tells a story about where it came from, what is that story actually arguing for? And as you think about how we construct our own histories, I'll leave you with this to ponder. Who does the story quietly leave standing in the East Country, watching everyone else walk away with the inheritance?